We're going to look now at how to write a model of the poem Musée des Beaux-Arts. And so we'll begin by looking at our classwork tab in Google Classroom. We're in Online Poetry Unit Week 3, April 20 to 24th. And we're going to come down here to this tab, Instructions and Examples for Writing a Model. And we'll start with the first document. And this is a step-by-step document, how you should do this project. So the first thing that you should do is you should choose the idea that you want to write about. You can consider what condition experienced by human beings you think is interesting enough that you might want to write a poem about it. Things that are common themes or motifs in literature and life are the idea of loneliness, the idea of adapting to change, the idea of suffering, the idea of compassion or generosity or aging, the experience of growing old, or even that YOLO kind of attitude, carpe diem, seize the day, you only live once. So, and it doesn't have to be one of these, it can be anything you choose. So the first step is choose your idea. The second step is you're going to brainstorm a list of ideas and words, thoughts, situations, whatever pops into your mind that you associate with the condition of human beings experiencing in your view. So for example, I'm going to think about the experience of loss, L-O-S-S, loss. And what are related ideas to the idea of human loss? And so I start with losing my keys, losing my wallet, losing money, losing time, losing a game, losing an argument, loss of a loved one, loss of my car in the parking lot, loss of a thought, a losing team, losing weight, losing my mind, losing touch, the loss of senses, like the loss of sight or the loss of sound, the loss of war, the loss of a friend, the lost puppy, losing hope, losing battle, lost and found, lost art. And so these were just sort of rapid fire ideas that I think about when I think about the idea of losing as it relates to being a human being. So that's my first task, brainstorming after I choose my idea. Then I go back to those museums. And again, I've listed hot links to them here, hyperlinks to them. You can look at the actual Musée des Beaux-Arts in Ontario, or the Met, or the Louvre, or the Van Gogh Museum, or the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands, the Smithsonian Museum of American Art. You can look at whichever site you want. You don't have to look at all of them. You just pick when you find a painting or a piece of art that you're interested in, that you think would make a good piece, then you're finished. So you look as much as you want. I actually ended up looking at the Met, and this is what their homepage looks like. I've been to the Met a number of times, so I sort of knew what art would be in here. And I scrolled through and until I found something interesting. So I started here at the Met collection. And inside the Met collection, I believe I looked at open access artworks. Anyhow, I scrolled through until I found this particular piece of work, and it's called The Card Players by Paul Cézanne. But what's interesting about it is it's a series of paintings. So he made a number of different paintings by the same title, and it's actually some kind of succession of ideas, him coming to terms with what he really wanted to paint. But ultimately, this is the painting that I chose to write about. So I chose The Card Players by Paul Cézanne, and I chose this painting for my example. But that's what you'll do in the first step. You're going to look for the painting that you want to write about. So I've chosen the idea of losing or loss, and I chose the painting, The Card Players by Paul Cézanne. And I also chose this because I thought losing at a card game would be an interesting way to show this theme develop in my poem. So after you've chosen your painting and you've established in your mind how it relates to your theme, you'll be at step 4, which basically says explain how the painting you chose relates to your theme. And so what I came up with is Cezanne actually has a series titled The Card Players, but I'm focusing my poem on this particular painting in the series, and I'm going to use the idea of losing in a game of cards, you know, that cliche, you win some, you lose some, as it applies to life. So that's the idea that I'm going to work with, and I am modeling Musée des Beaux-Arts. And so the next link I give you for step 5 is your step-by-step graphic organizer as a guide. And so let's open this document. And you'll see here that I've created for you the steps over here on the left side. The left column are the steps. And then on the right, I've left it blank. So what you'll do is in step 1, you'll write the idea that you've chosen. So here I would write loss. Now I've actually already filled this in as well. So let's look at the one that I filled in. Step 1 is choose what idea you're going to write about. I chose losing, the idea of losing physically and mentally, and how it is connected with many ideas of loss. Then I included my brainstorming activity, and that is the list of ideas or words or thoughts that are associated with this condition or this human experience, and that's my list of words I read to you a moment ago. And then it says to choose the painting, and so here's where I put a sample of that painting that I'm going to write about, and I give it its title. And then it says explain the choice of the painting, and so here I remind myself what it is I'm going to try to say about loss in relationship to The Card Players by Cezanne. And then I tell you in step 5, model Musée des Beaux-Arts, and this is the step-by-step guide. And so what I did over here is I broke down the poem into phrases and sections of stanzas, and then in black and bold and italics, I tell you what you should do to create your version of it. And then over here on the right, I've created my version. So the first step says give your poem a title here, and so I named mine Winning or Losing Doesn't Matter, and you'll remember my theme is this idea of losing. And then I just break it down phrase by phrase to the end of the poem. So let's just look at what the masters, W.H. Auden, said, and then how I'm going to model it. Auden said in his poem, about suffering they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position, the human position of suffering. The masters understood that, right? So over here, my version of it, I'm not a great poet, but I wrote, about losing the great players, they knew you couldn't win them all in cards or in life. So I'm just trying to tell you what the great players knew about losing, both in cards and in life. And so players is one of those words that has a couple different meanings. We call that double entendre in poetry. So it could actually mean like card players or game players, but it's also sometimes what we call people in life. We can sometimes say that they're players, and we add a number of different associative meanings to that depending on what we're actually talking about. So that's the original, and that's my model for how to open the poem. Then we go to the next section. The Auden poem says how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. And then I tell you, here you'll write about an ordinary example of the human condition in real life. So that's what I did over here. How you win some, you lose some, whether playing cards or losing your wallet. It happens in each of us, or happens to each of us once in a while. So this is my sort of ordinary experience with loss. Down here, how when the aged are reverently, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there always must be children who did not specially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. So you'll remember in the analysis, I explained to you that this was an illusion. So my instruction for you at this point is now you create an illusion in your poem. Remember, you're going to talk about something that happened in history that most people who are educated would recognize. These things often come from mythology or Shakespeare or the Bible or any cultural reference that educated people would understand. And so over here, I make my illusion, and it's still connected to the theme of losing. How there must be someone watching over, because people might cheat. They might do anything to avoid losing, like the 8 members of the White Sox baseball team in 1920 trying to fix a game. Baseball fans everywhere didn't want to believe it. They just wanted to see their team play baseball. So you'll see in my stanza here, I made the allusion to the White Sox baseball team of 1920, and this was the team that tried to fix the game. They cheated to win the World Series. And so in the next stanza, they never forget that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course. And this is the part where you return to the idea of the great painters or the great artists, or in my case, the great players. And the they, we're going to see how they remind us about the idea we're talking about. And so over here, we'll say they show us, they, the great players, show us loss over and over again. The carvings in the headstones, the mourning in the songs, the zeros in my bank account, the team that goes home after more quietly, somberly after the big game. And so here we have how players show us loss in lots of different ways. Physical death as represented by the headstone, sad songs that we listen to when we're players and we've been played, the zeros in the bank accounts. These are when you've lost in the game of money or employment, the team that goes home after more quietly, somberly after the big game. Actually, I think I'm going to take that word out there. But this is about the team that lost and their trip home and how that's different than winning and what the winning team feels like. And so then we're down to our last two. Here we have anyhow in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturous horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. You'll remember that this was a return to that ordinary imagery and how things that weren't connected to the event had no idea that it was even going on. And so over here I write, anyhow, in a bar somewhere, people are arguing over whether or not it was fixed, again referring to that 1920 baseball game, and a waitress just trying to make a living doesn't even realize that she too might be losing her battle. And so I bring it back to the ordinary, a waitress in a bar where people are arguing about the game being fixed and its rightness or wrongness, and the waitress who has nothing to do with any of that. She's just trying to survive and is battling her own losses that no one else is even aware of. And then in the last stanza, this is where we go to the art. And so the whole last stanza says how the art that I chose represents this idea of loss that I just kind of poetically explained. And so you remember the Bruegel-Icarus comparison and the scene in the water. In mine, I say, in Cézanne's, the card players, for instance, surely each player knows he might lose, while the bouncer against the wall watches with a careful eye to catch those who try to cheat to win, and the men study the hand they were dealt to try to avoid the inevitable. The inevitable, of course, is losing, and this is the picture, the bouncer watching over to make sure nobody cheats. And all of that in that last stanza can be understood two different ways. It can be understood about the card game, and it can also be understood about losing at life and the boundaries that we have set up, safety nets, I guess, that we hope will make it so that we don't lose. So anyhow, this is an example of how to organize and model the poem. And the next lecture will look at the actual poem that I wrote.